welcome to the Badaboom podcast. I'm Chris. Today we're excited because we finally get to read the Ultimates #1. This is a part of the Ultimates universe from Marvel. We've already reviewed Spider-Man and now we're reviewing Ultimates. So what did you think, Troy?
I mean, this is the show. Like this issue is the show I feel like for the Ultimate Universe because there's so many things that happened in this that it really felt like I was watching a movie in just this one issue. And I've only really read like Ultimate Spider-Man. I read a little bit of Ultimate X-Men and a little bit of Ultimate Black Panther, but just mostly consistently reading Ultimate Spider-Man. And this is the big zoom out moment of the new Ultimate Universe that we're experiencing and seeing like how big this universe is and the effects of like all the changes that have been happening. It's like this was an epic #1. If you are doing anything with the Ultimates, like you need to read this because it's just a great book overall, but also like the context it provides to what's going on in this world the maker has corrupted is insane. But what did you think, Chris?
Yeah, I really like the book. It has a lot of, big shoes to fill, and especially with what happens towards the end of the issue, that was a pun. But when it comes to this series, the original Ultimates, which was from Mark Millar and Bryan Hitch, obviously set the tone for the early 2000s when it comes to comic books. I love the animated movies that they had made, where it was the Ultimates Part 1 and Part 2. Both of those movies were great, and I had those on DVD. So I'd had really high hopes when it came to this series. And what this does really well, like you said, it really sort of like zooms out on the universe and really goes into the things that were happening in Ultimate Invasion and also the things that are happening in the background of Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate Black Panther, and Ultimate X-Men. Particularly like with Ultimate Black Panther and Ultimate Spider-Man, being that Ultimate Spider-Man, I feel like that was the sort of the first hero of this new universe. I mean, there's other heroes, but that was the first person to kind of take on this power. And it's been interesting to see sort of how they follow up on that. So, it's written by Dennis Camp, and then the art is by Juan Frigeri. And Camp does a really good job of sort of like, especially the early part of the issue is a lot of doom and
Yeah.
Tony sort of talking about time travel. And I think the fact that Tony is a teenager in this definitely makes it a lot more digestible, that early part of the issue. Especially being that, the action doesn't really kick in towards the end. And I really like that the way it's paced, the humor, and also like, yes, it has big shoes to fill, but it's its own thing. It's not like Camp and Frigeri trying to be, Millar and Hitch. It's like a completely new thing. It's exploring other things. And also too, like, in terms of like the groundwork that Hickman put in terms of like building the foundation of this new Ultimate Universe, they do some things that were really cool and I think interesting. Like it has that moment with Hank Pym towards the end of the issue where
Hmm.
whereas Peter sort of like jumped right in and he's like, I need to be the person that I was meant to be. Hank is like, I don't want to be that person. And there's a really good moment between him and Captain America. And I felt that was a really good way to kind of flip that moment and make it their own and tell you that, hey, yes, the foundation was laid by Hickman, but this is a very different story and they're putting their own twist and kind of having their own thing. And when it comes to this new Ultimate Universe, every book really has its own flavor, which has been really cool.
Yeah, and there's plenty more to come for sure inside this Ultimate Universe because, like you said, Hank didn't choose to be Ant-Man for quite a while. And there's plenty of other people that probably also didn't choose to embrace who they were in the 616 universe. And I mean that's why Captain America and Tony are coming down and convincing people like in person because the video just didn't really work that well. So there are other people that either didn't embrace it, or if you've been reading Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man, like the Shocker stole his stuff from the original Shocker. So it's tough to see like where some of this stuff has landed and who actually may have it because like the book says, the time travel, they just sent it back and it's instantly happening already for 6 months. So they don't really know, and they might find more stuff as this series progresses. And if you look at the very last couple pages, I don't think I've seen this in some of the other Marvel Ultimate Line books. On the very last page, it shows a map of the world and who controls certain pieces of territory. And so that's really interesting to take a look at and see those potential Easter eggs and like what's going to happen next essentially. And that's one of my favorite things about reading comics and why I think this is such a great series because when you have those what if moments or like, oh, maybe this will happen and you want to theorize, like that's what's fun about being a fan of these books is you get to make up your own stories in anticipation for what's actually going to happen and see if you're right, see if you're wrong, or see if something that you never would have thought possible ends up happening.
What I will say is that that map actually does appear in previous Ultimate books, just not in the solo series. So
Mm,
if you haven't read Ultimate Invasion or any of the original sort of, when the Ultimate Universe kind of came back with Jonathan Hickman and Bryan Hitch, those books are really important, especially sort of setting up who Tony and Doom are, just because in those books, that's where you see Tony or Iron Lad defeat the Maker and lock him in the prison with his dad. Like, so there's a lot of stuff that happens. And that's why in this particular book, and sort of what we think is this first arc is, them sort of rebuilding this age of heroes in preparation for the return of the Maker or evil Reed Richards. But, what's interesting about the book too is because Doom is also Reed Richards. So it's interesting to kind of see, like, as you said, sort of where's certain people will land. And some of that stuff kind of really breaks down. Again, those Easter eggs are in the other books. Like with Black Panther, he has Khonshu and Ra. Those are kind of like the villains of that book. And they appear in Ultimate Invasion and they control an aspect of this new world where, it's different continents and stuff like that. Certain characters like the Hulk appear and stuff. So if this is probably the one Ultimate book that you probably have to do a little bit of homework with. I do think you can enjoy it without reading some of that stuff, but you will be lost as to wait, who, like, what did the Maker do? And, like, why are they so scared of him? And what is this new universe and how he created it? That is really good homework to do to kind of enjoy it a little bit better. But, they do a good job of creating something that's really digestible and has that action towards the end that makes this stand on its own.
yeah, it's a great book, and like you said, there is a bit of homework. If you don't feel like you can dive into it, though, there is a little bit of explanation at the beginning of every book, but it's not enough to really, I think, really grasp the magnitude of everything that's happened in some of these previous series.
Yeah, and it does something that I think is really difficult. It's obviously trying to be the flagship book of this new exciting universe. It has a history it has to play up to. And also, like, this is probably the book out of all of them that probably has to, like, set the stage for the lore of this new universe. A lot
Mm.
of characters in this new Ultimate universe are probably going to make their first appearance in the Ultimates. And if you look at it, like, Marvel's biggest books notoriously is always the Avengers, and this year there have been some great Avengers books, including Avengers Twilight. And I think this kind of like fits that mold very well, where it's like, hey, like, if you've been tired of sort of like what's been happening in the 616, maybe you don't hate it, but you also don't love it because it's not exciting. It's not really going in any interesting directions. I think the Ultimates is exactly what you would need. It doesn't have the same feel as like Ultimate Spider-Man, where I read that and like I was like, oh my God, this is the Spider-Man book I've been waiting to read for like 10 years. But I do think, and part of that is there have been some like really cool and interesting Avengers runs in the last couple years. And obviously, the Ultimates is iconic. And that's something I really love because of the animated movies and the first couple volumes of the book. But I do think it does a really good job and is like the perfect kind of like superhero comic where you have people sort of stepping up against a greater evil, sort of, stepping into what they're supposed to be, following that hero's journey. So I'm really excited to see where Camp and Frigeri are taking this because for me, I think I like Ultimate Spider-Man, but I see that as like a Spider-Man book, and I see this very much as like a Marvel, like an Ultimate book. It is called the
Yeah.
Ultimate, but
Yeah.
this is the one that it's like, hey, like this is the one with the big lore that I can really like, dive into and stuff like that. Where I feel the other books are a little bit more personal stories about characters that I do love, but this is what comics is about. Big world building, big superhero team ups, big characters. So this is the one I'm really gonna be really invested in.
Definitely, yeah. And if you haven't read it yet, go to your local comic book shop, pick up Ultimates #1, and read it. And then let us know what you guys thought about it in the comments. Did you hate it? Did you love it? Are you looking forward to more? Let us know. And with that, bada boom.
Bada boom.
Thank you for listening to the Badaboom podcast. Keep the conversation going with Chris and I on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. You can find us on all these places at Badaboom Podcast. Get into the comments on our YouTube channel. Let us know what you like about the show or what you'd like to hear from us in the future. Until next time, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thanks for listening.